Picture this. It's Monday afternoon and you're at Domino's buying a large 3-topping pizza. You give the Domino's employee $7.99 plus tax, of course. Now, picture this. It's Friday and you're at Domino's buying a large 3-topping pizza. You give the Domino's employee more than you paid Monday. You feel bamboozled. But then you hear this.
Domino's is now extending its $7.99 large 3-topping carryout deal to all day, every day.
And so you danced and ate Domino's. Carry out only. You must ask for this limited time offer. Prices, participation, and charges may vary.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Bee in Eden, which is being broadcast on Podfire Radio at the website podfireradio.com. My name is SedonaDeb, and I am your hostess and the creator of this show. You can find me on the internet at my homepage billboard of slaythebankster.com. You can also find YouTube archives of the show, along with links to my written transcript or blog that accompanies each episode. Now, besides creating the Bee in Eden shows, I also write articles every week for the news website roguemoney.net. And today's show is taken from a blog that I wrote there a couple of months ago. But if you just remember my homepage of slaythebankster.com, then you can jump over to any of those features or even find me on social media. I'd also like to thank the sponsors of Podfire Radio who are making these incredible shows possible. And let's thank the folks at ambientmixer.com for the bee buzz music you hear playing in the background between the breaks. May the wind blowing through the chimes invite you to buzz along with me as we explore lessons from mankind's past. Our goal here at the Bee in Eden is to begin anticipating our future by remembering our past. Today's episode is the fourth show in a series of blogs that I have been writing about the international fascination with that land that surrounds the South Pole, the continent of Antarctica. The subject for today's show is Operation Tabarin and what the Brits found. Now, in the previous episode of this Antarctica series, we talked about the propaganda that was carefully planted at the beginning of the 20th century by an elite circle of occultists, intelligence operatives, and fictional writers who held memberships in secret societies. The message that they were seeding in the public's mind was the idea that there is a location somewhere on Earth where the remains of a prehistoric civilization can be found, a place where people had mastered the use of an all-powerful energy force called the Vril, and that word is spelled V like Victor, R-I-L. It was conjectured that the Earth was really a hollow sphere and that it was possible to travel to any point on Earth's surface via subterranean passages and tunnels. Supposedly, these people had achieved a paradise-like civilization that they enjoyed with incredibly long lifespans. Now, all of that might sound familiar to you as a plot from an old movie called Lost Horizon, and indeed, that fictional book did emerge out of this general stream of thought. We'll take a quick break here, but come right back because we're going to dive into a fantastic, unbelievable story of what happened next a story that indicates that the British Empire believed the words of Admiral Dönitz of the German Navy, and that they sent special intelligence teams down to Antarctica to see just what were the Germans up to on our most southern continent. Okay, we'll be right back.
Started out as ordinary became a life of voyages and journeys throughout the world. Wilbur Van Tyne was part of some of the most monumental historical moments in American history, along with his crew, sailing on ships, across oceans, working his way to shipmaster, and becoming Captain Wilbur H. Van Tyne. To learn more about his experiences, triumphs, and the love that made him bear it all, visit online at somenauticaltales.com.
And we're back. Now, getting back to these stories that were being passed around in the early 1900s of a paradise world that was hidden inside an ice land, this mythology proved to be especially tantalizing to a minority of German people who were desperately seeking a way to rebuild an empire left in ruins after World War I. This seemed to be the key that they were looking for. Just go find this secret place and rediscover our Aryan Nordic roots. Master this uber energy force called the Vril, and the world will be ours for the taking. Thus was born the Nazi Party and its embedded secret elite cults of SS officers, and an even more secret and mysterious cult within that cult called the Ahnenerbe. These men truly believed that they could forge a new scientific technology by studying the ancient lost wisdom of prehistory. And to some extent, they did succeed in their quest. To this day, the extent of their achievements has been carefully concealed by the Allied powers, who supposedly won the Second World War. The man who took Hitler's place, the man who controlled Germany's navy and her mighty U-boat force, Admiral Karl Dönitz, stood up at the Nuremberg trials and unabashedly proclaimed that the Nazi Party had indeed built an impregnable paradise fortress for the Fuhrer. Does that sound too incredible to be true? Well, Karl Dönitz has gone down in history as the commander of the awe-inspiring German U-boat machine. He was fiercely loyal to the Nazi Party and continued to recognize Hitler as his Fuhrer long after Hitler's supposed death. He had good reason to believe that Hitler was still his Fuhrer, because the evidence is piling up that the Nazi Party simply transferred their headquarters from the northern hemisphere to the southern one in 1945, all with the aid of hundreds of U-boats that just seemed to never quite get accounted for by the Allies after World War II. Now, once again, we turn to the WebEx extract entitled Britain's Secret War in Antarctica. And for those who are listening to this while viewing my blog, you'll see links to all these references that we mention in the show. But in this webpage, Britain's Secret War in Antarctica, there is a truly jaw-dropping narrative. It astounds me that nobody has produced a blockbuster movie or a 7-part Netflix miniseries of this supposedly non-fictional tale. Well, maybe that's not so surprising. Sometimes it suits the interests of the intelligence agencies to divert the public's attention from the truth by spreading a buffet of UFOs, extraterrestrials, and official so-called World War II history documentaries. Even now, we see so much being produced that comes close to and yet never quite landing directly on the truth. Today's sequel in our Antarctica saga swirls around the role that Great Britain played in the secret Antarctica battlefront. Admiral Karl Dönitz of the German Navy held all the trump cards with his control of the German Kriegsmarine. As reported in that web extract, this is what they say, and I quote, "In one of his inaugural speeches to a select officer elite, Dönitz claimed that the German submarine fleet is proud of having built for the Fuhrer in another part of the world a Shangri-La land, an impregnable fortress." That's the end of the quote. Now, this was an impressive statement and one that inspired allegiance in his officers and pride in Hitler and the Kriegsmarine, the German Navy. Dönitz's statement spread around the Kriegsmarine with gusto, for all who heard it believed in the possibility. At the conclusion of my previous story, I raised an eyebrow over the fact that Dönitz received a mere 10-year slap on the wrist as his punishment for Nazi crimes against humanity following his trial at Nuremberg. What's more, when released from Spandau prison, he got to live out his days in free West Germany in Hamburg. There were other Nazi officials with far less devoted allegiance who received sterner sentences and were dragged off to East Germany. Therefore, it is the speculation of that same web article I quoted from earlier that Dönitz likely struck a deal with the Allies. The web article goes on to say this, and I quote, "In light of Dönitz's pledge to continue the fight and the vast force still under his command, and considering Allied fears, could peace have been struck, a peace that had guarantees for all sides, Dönitz could have asked for Germany to be rebuilt and not humiliated like at Versailles at the end of the First World War. For the Western Allies to fight the spread of Bolshevism and for leniency, if not clemency, from the victors, including a whitewash of his personal wartime history, in exchange for a total surrender and for passing on extremely sensitive intelligence. Only a week after Dönitz had declared that the war would continue whilst Bolshevism persisted, he ordered the surrender of all German forces. All the facts indicate that Dönitz's history has been suppressed, and against all reason, Dönitz is still not perceived by mainstream historians as having been a major player in Nazi Germany. Clemency was shown with such a short prison sentence, the communist threat had been realized by the Western Allies, and West Germany rose out of the ashes of May 1945 to become the powerhouse of Europe, with many of the major companies that bankrolled the Nazi Party forming huge conglomerates. And that's the end of the quote from that article. So what we're saying here is that to strike such a sweetheart deal with the Allies, the victors of World War II must have had reason to believe that his Shangri-La in the Southern Hemisphere was no mere rant of an insane naval admiral. Indeed, there is a first-person account that proves that Great Britain had discovered at least one Nazi Shangri-La in Antarctica during this operation called Operation Tabarin. What's more, Britain held their intel tightly close to their vest and away from her closest ally, the United States. Now, we're going to get into the incredible tale that is told by a man who claims to be a survivor of a military operation that was sent down to the United Kingdom. And his story has never been thoroughly debunked. It was downplayed, which was interesting. The government downplayed his story, which tended to lend some bit of credibility to his story. But the story has never been completely either corroborated nor debunked. Now, here is where the story takes place between October to December of the year 1945. And I continue from my blog. Decades after the war, a survivor of a British special ops team told the tale of a top-secret assignment that landed him and a dozen or so commandos in a campaign for which he would never receive any public credit. It is whispered as Britain's New Schwabenland campaign. New Schwabenland was the name that Germany gave to the piece of Antarctica that they claimed for themselves. And this was located, if you look at a map of Antarctica, this is in the territory named Queen Maud land. And it's the land that Hitler's people had basically walked all over because it literally belonged to Norway. But even before Hitler invaded Poland, he went down there with his forces and staked a claim down on Norway's territory. In my previous story, I mentioned that as the actual first invasion that took place by the Germans, even before their invasion of Poland. Okay, now this story takes place in the months October to December of 1945, and remember, in the southern hemisphere, that would be the warmer months. Now, keep in mind that this time period of October of 1945, it's so critical when you overlay all the other events taking place in other parts of the world. Hitler's crowd has made their getaway to Argentina in the months of April to May of 1945. Admiral Karl Dönitz gets arrested on May of 23rd, 1945. Germany surrenders, and the Nuremberg trial dates are set. At almost the exact same moment, when Europe is celebrating VE Day in May of 1945, way down in Swabia, Antarctica, there are two panicked survivors of a previous British reconnaissance team who are screaming these terrifying words into a radio message. "The polar men have found us." And then, boom, their radio goes dead. Now, this special ops veteran relates his story, and I have this all linked in my blog if you want to check out the source of this story. He says, "We were told in no specific terms what was expected of us and what Britain expected us to find on Antarctica. Britain had more than a strong suspicion that the Germans had built a secret base and had spirited many of the unaccounted Nazis away from the turmoil in Europe. Still, more and more revelations were forthcoming. The summer before, we were told, the original scientists and commandos had found an ancient tunnel. Under orders, the force went through the tunnel, but only 2 returned before the Antarctic winter set in. That would have been during our summer months." Okay, then he goes on. "During the winter months down there, the 2 survivors made absurd claims over the radio about polar men, ancient tunnels, and Nazis. radio contact was finally lost in July of 1945 with these two men. And ominously for our mission, going into the unknown, the last broadcast us all further anxiety as we listened to the fear in the voice. "The polar men have found us," was screamed before contact was lost. After the radio broadcast was played, we were then given a rousing speech from the major who would be leading the expedition to investigate what had happened. "We are to go to the base at Maldheim, find the tunnel, investigate the enigma of the polar men and the Nazis, and do what we can to make sure the Nazi threat is destroyed." Now, this veteran goes on to describe how his commando team found one of those two British spies manning the now deserted camp in October of 1945. This one lone survivor had been alone all there since July of 1945. So this freshly arrived team of commandos wanted to know what happened to his comrade. Apparently, the two of them were part of a larger team of spies who discovered a long tunnel located in a dry valley that opened eventually into a huge cavern staffed by hundreds of Nazi personnel. The story goes on, and I quote, "The vast underground cavern was abnormally warm. Some of the scientists believed that it was warmed geothermally. In the huge cavern were underground lakes. However, the mystery deepened as the cavern was lit artificially. The cavern proved so extensive that they had to split up, and that was when the real discoveries were made. The Nazis had constructed a huge base into the caverns and had even built docks for U-boats, and one was identified supposedly. Still, the deeper they traveled, the more strange visions they were greeted with." Now, we're going to take a break here, but then come right back because we're going to see what happened as this commando team actually made contact with these terrifying polar men. Okay, we'll be right back.
Started out as ordinary became a life of voyages and journeys throughout the world. Wilbur Vantine was part of some of the most monumental historical moments in American history, along with his crew, sailing on ships, across oceans, working his way to shipmaster, and becoming Captain Wilbur H. Vantine. To learn more about his experiences, triumphs, and the love that made him bear it all, visit online at somenauticaltales.com.
And we're back. Before the break, we were diving into this story that was related to a magazine reporter for the magazine called Nexus. Quite a few years ago, And this man purports to be one of the survivors of a reconnaissance team, or actually a search and rescue team, that was sent down to Antarctica in October of 1945 to go investigate and rescue some survivors of a previous reconnaissance mission. Great Britain had actually sent quite a few expeditions down to Antarctica during the war years. So that part is known for sure. It's this part of the story that has never been officially acknowledged by the government. In fact, all the files regarding these Antarctica expeditions by Great Britain in the 40s remain classified to this day. But let's pick up where we left off. And according to the story, he had said that the Nazis had constructed a huge base into the ice caverns and had even built docks that could accommodate U-boats. And as this team continued advancing forward secretly through the cavern, they found more and more strange sights. Now, this survivor reported that hangars for strange planes and excavations galore had been documented. However, their presence had not gone unnoticed. This team of British search and rescue commandos were trying to make their way and investigate this Nazi base, but unfortunately their presence did get noticed. The two survivors at the Monheim base witnessed their comrades get captured and executed one by one. And I apologize, this part of the story is actually talking about the original reconnaissance team back in June of 1945, who had first uncovered the Nazi base. After witnessing only 6 of the executions, they fled to the tunnel lest they be caught, with the aim to block up the tunnel. Though it was too late, the polar men were coming, claimed the survivor. So what happened, this team had got discovered, and they wanted to block the tunnel to this Nazi base, but only two of these British men were able to get out alive, and they had some creature called a polar man who was chasing them. And the story goes on. With enemy forces hot on their tail, they had no choice but to try to get back to the base so that they could inform and warn their superiors about what they had uncovered. They managed to get back to their base, but with winter approaching and little chance of rescue, they believed it was their duty to make sure that the secret Nazi base was reported. And so they split up, each taking a wireless radio and waiting in separate bunkers. One of the survivors tempted one of the polar men into the bunker in the hope that they'd believe only one had survived. Now, there's no picture, of course, of what these polar men look like, but in your mind, if you can envision something like a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch, that might be something akin to what this reporter was describing. So there's a polar man or a pair of them who are chasing these two British spies. They split up so that they have a better chance of having one of them achieving safety in the bunker. They each had a wireless radio. The plan worked, but to the detriment of his life, of one of these two British commandos, and to the radio. Unfortunately, the brave soul in Bunker 1 had the only fully operational wireless radio, which was destroyed in the fracas. The other survivor had no option but to sit and try to avoid going stir-crazy. So what he's saying is these two people were being chased by this polar man. They each had a radio, and unfortunately, the man who had the better radio got captured by the polar man. Now, this lone survivor goes on to say the mystery of who or what the polar men were was explained, not satisfactorily, but explained nonetheless as a product of Nazi science and the enigma of how the Nazis were getting power was also explained, albeit not in scientific terms. The power that the Nazis were utilizing was by volcanic activity, which gave them heat for steam and also helped produce electricity. But the Nazis had also mastered an unknown energy source because the survivor claimed, and we quote, "After what I witnessed, the amount of electricity needed is more than could have been produced, in my opinion, by steam." Now, after hearing this lone survivor story, the major of the commando team here in October of 1945 decided that they should go investigate whatever was locked up behind the door of Bunker 1. That's where the other commando team member with the better radio had got stuck in there and got chased in there by a polar man. The lone survivor begged them not to open that bunker, but they did it anyway. The veteran eyewitness reported that indeed a huge, hairy polar man ran out so fast that the team only got off a few shots. The humanoid escaped into the wilderness, and the team discovered the bones of the other survivor of the spy team, the one who had the better radio. He had been devoured by the polar man, who sat in that bunker for nearly 4 months, between July to October of 45, waiting for a rescue team. We'll take a little pause here, and I encourage you to look this up on the blog and click the links that I provide to finish reading this riveting tale. The conclusion of this account states that the commando team did in fact investigate the tunnel and did discover a highly populated Nazi base, just as this lone spy survivor had reported. The commando team lured the polar man to his death and laid mines all over the tunnel and partially into the cavern's space. However, just when the commando team was preparing to detonate the explosives, they were discovered by the Nazi guards. A chase was given, and this one veteran of the team who's giving this story to this newspaper reporter, him plus a Norwegian guide and a scientist observer were all that got away safely from this chase. Even the lone survivor of the original reconnaissance team was killed in this mission. These 3 men lived to tell the tale only to themselves and a handful of British elite. The rest of the commando team accomplished their mission goal to wipe out any evidence of the tunnel by detonating the explosive, but they paid for their bravery with their lives and remain unsung heroes of this Antarctic battleground. Now, keep in mind that all of this is happening just as the Nuremberg trials are opening over in Europe. Admiral Karl Dönitz makes his public statements about some paradise fortress staffed for the Fuhrer. The British are happy that they succeeded in blocking any evidence of this one tunnel, but how do they know if there might be other similar caverns and Nazi bases in Antarctica? Well, they only have to wait a few more months to find out, and that will be the subject of a future episode in this Antarctic tale. It's the very highly publicly American expedition known as Operation High Jump. Now, in conclusion, I'd like to mention something that Dr. Joseph P. Farrell mentioned recently about these events in Antarctica. And in a recent radio interview that he gave really just a few weeks ago, he made this point. It's safe to assume that the Nazis looked at that story of Atlantis from that ancient story by Plato in the same way. And the reason I say this is that in 1935, Heinrich Himmler began to recruit people into the SS that had, let's say, esoteric credentials. In 1940, he officially establishes the Ahnenerbe, or that translates as the Ancestral Research Bureau. In the memo he uses to establish this thing, this department is set up to investigate occult lore, legends, literature, practices of all types, no matter how loony it seemed, for its potential military application. So in other words, Dr. Farrell says, what Nazi Germany is telling you is that it's the first modern great power that is deliberately going out and looking for a lot of ancient stuff for its potential military application. And this was the quote that I love from Dr. Farrell. He says, we now have the weaponization of archaeology. To me, this is a clear signal that the Nazis suspect there's something going on in these ancient texts that clearly indicate that there is a destructive technology that simply went missing when we blew ourselves apart in some earlier part of human history. I think, given all these background circumstances, it's a plausible speculation that, yes, they were going down to Antarctica to look for something. So put that into the context of the recent visit by Secretary of State John Kerry and all kinds of other high-profile visitors, which include Prince Harry, King Juan Carlos, and even the Patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church. And that's where we'll leave the story today. And when we get together again at the Bee in Eden, we're going to pick up with the disastrous 1946 American invasion in Antarctica that is now known as Operation High Jump. But for now, this is the host of your show, SedonaDeb, buzzing back to her blog and wishing you pleasant thoughts as you ponder all these stories that may or may not be true, that have a bearing on us knowing exactly what has happened in mankind's past and how it is affecting mankind's future. I'd like to thank again the sponsors of Podfire Radio, and thank you all for listening into this incredible tale. Until next time, this is SedonaDeb from the Bee in Eden.
Okay, Kevin, for the grand prize of $1 million. What color is the White House?
I know this.
5 seconds.
Oh, switching to Geico could save you a bunch of money on car insurance?
Okay. Judges? That's true, Kevin. They'll allow it. Congratulations. You're a winner.
Woo!
Geico, because saving 15% or more on car insurance is always a great answer.
Picture this. It's Monday afternoon and you're at Domino's buying a large 3-topping pizza. You give the Domino's employee $7.99 plus tax, of course. Now, picture this. It's Friday and you're at Domino's buying a large 3-topping pizza. You give the Domino's employee more than you paid Monday. You feel bamboozled. But then you hear this.
Domino's is now extending its $7.99 large 3-topping carryout deal to all day, every day.
And so you danced and ate Domino's. Carry out only. You must ask for this limited time offer. Prices, participation, and charges may vary.